Jake, Rainer, and Eric Holt thought they were just picking up supplies at Walmart, but within minutes, the two Marine veterans were charging into chaos unarmed and outnumbered to stop a knife-wielding attacker before a quiet afternoon turned into a mass tragedy. It was supposed to be just another ordinary Thursday afternoon in Brookridge, Florida, the kind of quiet, uneventful day most small towns take for granted. The skies were clear, and the heat of the summer sun shimmered off car rooftops as families and locals made their way in and out of stores. At the center of this everyday activity stood the town's busiest Walmart, a place where weekly shopping was as routine as morning coffee. The parking lot was packed, carts clattered across asphalt. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed as a constant flow of customers moved through. Among them were Jake Rainer and Eric Holt, two former U.S. Marines, dressed in plain clothes, casually walking side by side with the ease of men who had known each other through more dangerous times. Jake and Eric had seen the worst of war together during their tours in Afghanistan. Back then, their bond was built under the pressure of combat and uncertainty. Years had passed since they left active duty, but their loyalty to each other and to the values they had lived by remained solid. Now civilians, they had found different paths, but kept close contact, often catching up over coffee or meeting at local veteran centers. That day, they had planned to meet briefly, pick up supplies, and head to a community meeting across town. Neither man carried a weapon. There was no expectation that anything unusual would happen. Inside the store, it was business as usual. The scent of popcorn from the front concession stand filled the air. Shoppers moved through the aisles, scanning shelves and checking lists. A child cried near the toy section. Someone sneezed in the pharmacy aisle. And the buzz of conversation blended with the hum of freezers and checkout scanners. The air conditioning was cool and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering faintly in places. Jake and Eric split up briefly, one veering toward tools, the other heading to electronics. It was routine, almost dull in its predictability. No one noticed the man who had entered just minutes earlier, blending into the crowd with a calm demeanor. Dressed in jeans and a hoodie despite the heat, Daniel Cross didn't look out of place. He moved with quiet purpose, browsing the shelves in the kitchenware section, then slowly drifting toward the front of the store. He didn't speak to anyone. No one paid him any attention. Surveillance footage would later reveal that he had paused briefly near the knives, gripping the handle of one displayed model with a subtle but chilling intent. As he slipped it into his sleeve and turned, the clock struck to 47 p.m. In that split second, the normalcy shattered. No one could have predicted the horror that was about to unfold. But within moments, the peaceful rhythm of everyday life inside that Walmart would be replaced with the sound of screams, the rush of panic, and the extraordinary courage of two men who refused to freeze in the face of terror. The first scream sliced through the calm like a siren. Shoppers froze mid-step, unsure of what they just heard. Then came another scream, louder, more panicked. A cart tipped over near the produce section as people began backing away. That's when the man appeared, sprinting down the main aisle, his arm raised, a gleaming kitchen knife in his hand. For a few seconds, confusion hung in the air like fog. Some thought it might be a prank. But the blood that followed left no room for doubt. Daniel Cross moved with a frantic kind of precision, slashing at anything in his path as he charged through the store. His face was expressionless, his movements jerky and wild. A young woman trying to protect her toddler was the first injured. A deep gash across her forearm sent her collapsing to the floor, screaming for help as her child wailed beside her. The store's intercom crackled to life with a nervous announcement, instructing shoppers to evacuate calmly, but the message was lost in the rising chaos. People screamed and scattered, abandoning their carts, pushing past one another in a frenzy to escape. Some ducked behind shelves or display stands, others ran toward emergency exits they'd never noticed before. Daniel seemed fueled by the panic, turning erratically, choosing victims at random. A man in his 50s took a stab wound to the shoulder while trying to protect his wife. A teenager tripped and twisted her ankle trying to flee. The store's two security guards hovered near the front, clearly unsure whether to confront the attacker or wait for law enforcement. Seconds felt like minutes. Jake Rainer had been comparing headphones when the screams started. He dropped the box in his hand and moved toward the noise without hesitation. Years of combat experience had trained his body to respond before his mind could catch up. Across the store, Eric Holt had also picked up on the sound and followed it, weaving quickly through panicked shoppers. Neither man waited for direction. They didn't need to. Their instincts were sharp, their sense of duty ingrained. As they moved closer to the chaos, they exchanged a brief glance across the aisles, understanding passing between them without words. Daniel was now moving toward the front of the store, waving his knife in wide, threatening arcs to clear his path. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wild. Jake calculated the distance and began moving to intercept from the side. Eric darted around a corner, aiming to flank from the opposite direction. Their plan wasn't rehearsed, but years of joint operations made their coordination flawless. Still, they knew they had only seconds to act. As Daniel turned toward a mother pushing a stroller, Jake accelerated, closing the distance fast. The next few moments would be critical. One mistake could mean more innocent lives lost. As terrified shoppers watched from behind shelves and counters, the scene shifted from chaos to confrontation. What had started as an afternoon errand was now something far more dangerous. The Marines were no longer bystanders. They were the only thing standing between a madman and a massacre. Jake closed in just as Daniel raised the knife toward the woman with the stroller. In a sudden burst of motion, he lunged forward and tackled Daniel from behind. The two men crashed hard into a stack of bottled water cases, toppling the display and sending plastic bottles rolling in every direction. The force of the hit knocked the knife loose, skidding across the linoleum floor. But Daniel wasn't done. Fueled by adrenaline, he twisted violently under Jake's grip, trying to get free. Shoppers gasped from behind nearby shelves, too terrified to move. Jake used his weight to try and hold Daniel down, but the attacker thrashed wildly, his arms flailing and feet kicking. Years in combat had prepared Jake for many things, but wrestling a knife-wielding maniac in a crowded store without backup wasn't one of them. Every second felt like a gamble. Daniel managed to roll partway over, landing a wild punch to Jake's jaw, but Jake didn't let go. He gritted his teeth and held on, locking his legs around Daniel's to limit his movement. Then, from the corner of the aisle, Eric appeared. Without breaking stride, he sprinted in and delivered a precise kick that sent the knife skittering farther away.
Out of reach.
Under a shelf and out of reach. Daniel roared in frustration, struggling harder. Eric dropped to the floor and helped Jake pin the man's arms, both men working in tandem, silently and efficiently. The struggle was brutal, short, and intense. But within moments, Daniel was face down, arms behind his back, legs trapped. The fight was over. Security guards finally arrived, radios crackling as they called for police and paramedics. They hovered, unsure whether to intervene, but Jake waved them off, keeping his eyes locked on Daniel's back. The attacker was breathing heavily, muttering incoherently, but no longer resisting. Blood from earlier injuries dotted the floor nearby, some of it his, most not. Around them, the store had gone eerily quiet. Panic had subsided, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Customers who had hidden now slowly emerged, wide-eyed and shaken. A few clapped weakly, others covered their mouths in shock. One woman dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. A teenage employee rushed over with a first aid kit and towels, tending to the wounded woman near the produce section. EMTs would later confirm that 5 people had been injured too seriously, but miraculously no lives were lost. When police officers arrived, they quickly took over the scene. Jake and Eric stepped back, hands raised in a show of cooperation. Their shirts were soaked in sweat, knuckles scraped, but they remained calm. Their mission had been clear. Stop the threat, protect the innocent, and they had done exactly that. As Daniel Cross was taken into custody, still muttering and glaring at the crowd, officers interviewed witnesses and reviewed security footage. The truth of what had happened was now undeniable. 2 veterans had stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. They didn't wait for help. They were the help. After Daniel Cross was taken into custody, the immediate danger had passed, but the investigation was just beginning. Officers sealed off the store, and crime scene units began collecting evidence. Shoppers were escorted out, and victims were transported to the hospital. But even as paramedics treated injuries and police officers recorded witness statements, detectives wanted to know what had caused this man to erupt into such unprovoked violence. There was no clear motive, no history with the store or its employees. It seemed random, which made it even more unsettling. As detectives dug into Daniel's background, they uncovered a troubling story. He was 37, unemployed, and had recently been evicted from his apartment. Neighbors described him as reclusive and agitated, often talking to himself and acting paranoid. He had no close family and few known friends. A pattern of instability emerged past arrests for minor offenses, reports of disturbing behavior, and several psychiatric evaluations that never led to long-term treatment. Though he had never committed an act of violence before, warning signs had clearly been missed. A few months earlier, a former coworker filed a restraining order after Daniel allegedly followed her home from work. He had once been taken in for a psychiatric hold, but was released after just 48 hours due to lack of evidence that he posed a threat. The most disturbing discovery came from his digital footprint. Investigators found a cluttered and cryptic journal saved on his laptop. In it, Daniel wrote about feeling watched, manipulated, and rejected by society. He referenced the noise, the watchers, and the cleansing. His language grew increasingly aggressive in recent entries. One file, titled Final Path, read like a manifesto. It listed multiple public spaces, including schools, churches, and retail stores, as potential targets of retribution. Walmart in Brookridge was highlighted. The document wasn't coherent in a traditional sense, but the intent was unmistakable. Daniel Cross had been planning something for weeks. The attack wasn't a moment of madness, it was a deliberate, premeditated act. Police concluded that Daniel had selected the Walmart due to its crowded nature and minimal security. The knife he used was taken from the store's own shelves. He had walked in with a calm demeanor to avoid suspicion, then acted quickly to create maximum panic. His plan likely would have continued had Jake and Eric not intervened. Authorities admitted that if the veterans hadn't been there, the casualty list would have been far worse. The town of Brookridge was shaken. For residents, the idea that such violence could erupt in a familiar, everyday place was deeply unsettling. Community leaders held vigils for the victims, and Walmart increased its on-site security presence nationwide. Mental health organizations called for more accessible resources, pointing to Daniel's long history of red flags. But amid the fear and confusion, one thing was clear to men: had prevented a tragedy. They hadn't worn uniforms or badges, but they had carried with them the courage and readiness to protect others, no matter the cost.
Damn.
In the days that followed the attack, the story of Jake Rainer and Eric Holt spread rapidly across the country. News stations aired footage from store security cameras showing the moment they tackled Daniel Cross and brought him down. Social media platforms lit up with praise, calling the two Marines heroes. Comment sections overflowed with gratitude and admiration, while veterans groups and law enforcement agencies highlighted their bravery as a shining example of decisive action under pressure. But for Jake and Eric, the recognition felt overwhelming and almost uncomfortable. They hadn't stepped in for praise, they had done it because they believed someone had to. While both men gave short interviews at the request of local authorities, they avoided the spotlight as much as possible. They returned to their lives quietly. Jake continued volunteering at a local veterans support group, while Eric resumed work at a mechanic shop he co-owned with his brother. But things weren't quite the same. Strangers began stopping them in public to thank them. Their names were entered into commendation records by the mayor's office. Even a representative from the governor's office contacted them about a possible ceremony in their honor. Meanwhile, the victims of the attack began recovering. A woman injured in the produce section required surgery on her arm, but was expected to regain full use. The man who de-shielded his wife from a stab wound was released from the hospital within 2 days. Counselors were brought in to help employees and shoppers process the trauma, and Walmart temporarily closed the store for renovations, including upgraded security cameras and a new emergency response system. While the town of Brookridge had been rattled, it began to heal, slowly but surely. Daniel Cross, on the other hand, faced a far different fate. After his arrest, he was evaluated by court-appointed psychiatrists and found to be suffering from a severe and untreated mental illness. He had been living in isolation for years, his thoughts increasingly consumed by delusions. The court declared him unfit to stand trial and ordered his transfer to a secure psychiatric facility. Though justice in the traditional sense would not be served, authorities made it clear that he would never again be allowed to roam free. What lingered most for the community was unteased: The attack it was the realization that safety is never guaranteed. Even in familiar places, people spoke more openly about mental health, about the importance of awareness and the need to act when something feels off. But even amid that sobering awareness, Jake and Eric's actions gave people something else. Hope. Hope that there are still people who will rise in a moment of danger. Not for reward or attention, but because they know how and when to act. For Jake and Eric, the event became a permanent part of their civilian journey. Though they didn't seek the role of heroes, the town had already given them that title. In Brookridge, their names would be remembered not just for what they stopped, but for what they saved.